I still remember the exact shade of blue the sky was that afternoon because I spent an embarrassing amount of time staring at it through my windshield, trying to convince myself that what I was about to do was just a nice gesture, a good deed, the kind of thing that normal people, decent people, did for their friends without overthinking it into something weird and complicated. I was parked outside her apartment complex, this clean little place off Ventura Boulevard, with white stucco walls and these manicured hedges that looked like they'd never seen a single day of drought. My engine was still running, the AC fighting against the San Fernando Valley heat, and I was gripping the steering wheel like it owed me money. Her name is Elena. She texted me earlier that morning, something that started with, "Hey, I know this is random," and ended with a photo of her kitchen floor covered in what looked like an exploded bottle of red wine and a shattered glass pitcher. The caption was a string of crying emojis and the words, "My landlord is coming in 2 hours and I have no car and no mop and I'm literally losing my mind." And me, being the idiot who still hasn't learned how to say no to her, had replied, "On my way," before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. That was the thing about Elena. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world who could solve her problems, even when the problems were as mundane as a spill on the floor. It wasn't manipulative, exactly. Or maybe it was, and I just didn't care because I liked the way it felt to be needed by her. I'd known her for about 3 years, ever since she'd started working at the same digital marketing agency where I was a senior account manager. She was a graphic designer, brilliant at it too, with this chaotic energy that somehow translated into clean, minimalist visuals that made our clients cry happy tears. We'd become work friends first, then actual friends, the kind who grab drinks after a brutal campaign launch and complain about our bosses and share way too much personal information while slightly drunk on margaritas. But somewhere along the way, the lines had blurred for me. I knew it, and I hated that I knew it, because I was married, happily married, or at least that's what I told myself every morning while I shaved and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My wife, Rachel, was a pediatric nurse at Cedars-Sinai, one of those people who genuinely made the world a better place just by existing. She came home exhausted most nights, smelling like hand sanitizer and cheap hospital coffee, and she'd still find the energy to ask me about my day and listen like she actually cared about the boring details of budget meetings and client revisions. We'd been together for 8 years, married for 5, and by all reasonable metrics, we had a good life, a solid life, the kind of life that people wrote Hallmark movies about, minus the dramatic meet-cute and the quirky small-town setting. So why did I feel this electricity in my chest every time Elena laughed at one of my stupid jokes? Why did I find myself volunteering for projects that required us to work late together, just so I could have her undivided attention for a few extra hours? Why had I memorized the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, and the little noise she made when she was frustrated, and the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she was genuinely amused? I didn't have answers for any of that. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to admit them out loud. I killed the engine and sat there for another 30 seconds, doing that thing where you mentally rehearse the conversation you're about to have. "Hey, I brought cleaning supplies. No problem. Let's get this fixed before your landlord shows up." Simple, normal, friendly. Nothing weird about that. I grabbed the plastic bag from the passenger seat, paper towels, a bottle of stain remover, some sponge mop I'd bought at the CVS on my way over, and walked up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. The stairwell smelled like someone's weed and the faint grease of a Chinese takeout place on the ground floor, standard LA apartment building stuff. I knocked on her door, and when she opened it, my breath actually caught for half a second, and I hated myself for it. She was wearing gray sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt that said something about saving the bees. Her hair was up in this messy bun that looked effortless, but probably took 15 minutes to perfect. There were stress flush patches on her cheeks, and she was waving her hands around as she launched into a frantic explanation about how the bottle had slipped, how she'd been trying to open a jar of pasta sauce and had knocked it off the counter, how it was actually a really expensive pitcher her grandmother had given her, and she felt like a complete disaster. Okay, breathe," I said, holding up the cleaning supplies like a peace offering. "I've got this. Show me the crime scene." She stepped aside and let me in, and I walked into her living room, which was exactly what you'd expect from a creative person with a decent salary and no kids. Exposed brick wall, mid-century modern furniture, a bookshelf overflowing with design books and random thrift store finds, and a window that looked out over the valley with that hazy LA light that makes everything look like it's filtered through nostalgia. The kitchen was just off the living room, and sure enough, there was a spectacular mess of red wine and glass shards all over the tile floor. "It looks like a murder scene," I said. And she laughed, this bright, nervous laugh that made me want to say something even funnier to hear it again. I know, right? I'm so sorry you had to come all the way over here for this. I just panicked. My landlord is this total nightmare, and if he sees the floor like this, he'll probably find a way to blame me for structural damage or something. Please, I said, kneeling down and pulling out the paper towels. This is nothing. I've cleaned up way worse. Remember the time at the company holiday party when Marcus threw up in the potted plant? She groaned, but she was smiling. Don't remind me. I still can't look at ficus trees without flinching. We worked together for the next 20 minutes, cleaning up the wine and sweeping up the glass. It was easy, comfortable, the kind of mundane activity that somehow feels intimate just because you're sharing it with someone. She'd hand me a new paper towel before I asked for it, or point out a shard I'd missed, and there were these tiny moments where our fingers brushed, and I'd feel this jolt that I had no business feeling. I kept my head down, focused on the task, tried to push everything else to the back of my mind. When we were done, the floor was clean enough to eat off of, or at least clean enough to pass a landlord inspection, and I was standing at her sink washing the red wine stains off my hands. She was leaning against the counter next to me, and I could feel her watching me, though I pretended not to notice. Seriously, she said, her voice softer now. Thank you. You didn't have to do this. It's fine, really. No, I mean it. She paused, and I heard her take a breath. You always show up for me, Ben. I don't know if you realize how rare that is. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands on a towel, buying myself a second to figure out how to respond. That's what friends do, right? Right, she said, but there was something in her voice that didn't quite match the word. A hesitation. A wait. I looked at her then, and she was looking back at me, with those dark eyes that seemed to see right through every excuse I'd ever made to myself. And for a moment, neither of us said anything. The air between us felt thick, charged, like the second before a thunderstorm breaks. I could hear the faint hum of her refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic on Ventura Boulevard, my own heartbeat in my ears. She took a step closer. Not a big step, just a small one, but enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral and clean, nothing like the antiseptic scent that followed Rachel home every night. Enough that I could see the freckles across her nose that I'd never noticed before. Ben, she said, and my name on her lips sounded different, softer, more deliberate. I should have stepped back. I should have made a joke, grabbed my keys, said something about needing to get back to work. I should have done a million things that would have kept the story from spiraling into what it eventually became. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, watching her eyes search mine like she was looking for permission. And the terrifying part, the part that still haunts me when I can't sleep at 3 a.m., was that part of me wanted to give it to her. The next few seconds felt like they stretched into hours, or maybe they were just seconds, and my brain was doing that thing where it tries to process too much information at once and just sort of short circuits. She was close enough now that I could see the slight unevenness in her lipstick, the tiny scar above her left eyebrow that she told me once came from a childhood bike accident. I could feel the warmth radiating off her, and I was acutely aware of every square inch of space between us, or rather the lack of it. Elena, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I'd intended, like I'd been shouting at a concert all night. I should probably what? She asked, and there was this edge to her voice, not angry, just challenging, like she was daring me to finish that sentence with something that wasn't a lie. I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I should probably do. I knew what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to apologize for the awkwardness, make some excuse about Rachel needing me at home, and walk out that door with my dignity and my marriage intact. But I had been lying to myself for so long about what I felt for Elena that standing there in her kitchen, with her looking at me like I was the only man in the world, all that self-deception crumbled like drywall. She reached out and touched my arm, just a light brush of her fingers against my forearm, and I swear I forgot how to breathe for a second. I've been wanting to tell you something for a while now, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And I keep telling myself it's not the right time, or it's not appropriate, or you're married and I should just shut up and deal with it. But I can't. I literally cannot keep pretending anymore. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. Elena, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She cut me off, but there was no anger in it, just this desperate, raw honesty that made my stomach drop. I know you're married. I know Rachel is amazing, and I know you love her. I'm not trying to wreck your life, Ben. That's the last thing I want. But I also can't keep pretending that there isn't something between us, something that I feel every single time you walk into a room. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Because how do you respond to that? How do you tell someone that you felt the exact same thing, that you've spent countless nights lying awake next to your wife thinking about this exact moment, when saying it out loud would make it real and irreversible? She took her silence as permission to keep going. I know it's selfish. I know I'm crossing a line. But when you showed up today with your cleaning supplies and your stupid jokes and your stupid good heart, I just couldn't hold it in anymore. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up, Ben, and the last thing I think about before I fall asleep. And I know that's not fair to you or to Rachel, and I've tried so hard to make it stop, but it won't. Her eyes were glistening now, and I could see the effort it was taking for her to keep her composure. And in that moment, I wanted to hate her for putting me in this position. I wanted to be angry at her for saying the things I'd been too cowardly to admit even to myself. But I couldn't, because she was just saying what I'd been feeling, and that made it a shared guilt, a mutual catastrophe. Elena, I started, and I reached up and touched her face without even thinking about it. Just this instinctive gesture, my thumb brushing against her cheek, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. You have no idea how long I've wanted to hear you say that, and also how much I wish you hadn't. She leaned into my hand, closing her eyes for a moment, and I felt something crack open inside my chest, something that had been holding all my carefully constructed defenses together. Then don't say anything, she whispered. Just stay, just for a few more minutes. That's all I'm asking. I should have left. I should have walked out that door and driven home and told myself that the whole thing was a close call, a near miss, a reminder of why I needed to be more careful around her. But I didn't. I stood there with my hand on her face, feeling the softness of her skin, and I let the world narrow down to just the two of us in that small, warm kitchen. And then she kissed me. It wasn't a tentative, testing the waters kind of kiss. It was the kind of kiss that you pour months of suppressed longing into, the kind that says everything you've been too afraid to say out loud. Her hands came up to my face, pulling me closer, and I responded before my brain had a chance to catch up and remind me what I was doing. My arms wrapped around her waist, and I kissed her back like I'd been starving for it, like she was oxygen and I'd been holding my breath for 3 years. The guilt hit me about 10 seconds later, a cold wave of nausea that made me pull back and break the kiss. I stepped away from her like she'd burned me, my hand flying to my mouth like I could physically undo what had just happened. Oh my God, I said, my voice shaking. Oh my God, Alina, I can't. We can't. She was breathing hard, her cheeks flushed, her lips slightly swollen from the intensity of the kiss. I know, she said, and there was this resignation in her voice that somehow made it worse. I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. No, I shouldn't have. I ran my hands through my hair, pacing back and forth in her tiny kitchen like a caged animal. This is insane. You're insane. I'm insane. What the hell is wrong with us? Probably a lot of things, she said, and there was a ghost of a sad smile on her face. But does it have to be wrong? Does it have to be a bad thing? What if it's just what it is? I stopped pacing and stared at her. What it is? Alina, I'm married. I have a wife who didn't do anything to deserve this. I made vows. I promised her. I know what you promised her, she said softly. I'm not asking you to break them. I'm not asking you to leave her. I'm just asking you to admit that this exists, that we exist, that whatever is between us is real, and it's not going to go away just because we pretend it's not there. I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to tell her that we could just go back to being coworkers, friends, whatever we were before this moment. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. You can't unring a bell. You can't unsay the things that have been said, unfeel the things that have been felt. And standing there in her apartment, with the ghost of her kiss still burning on my lips, I knew that everything was different now. "I need to go," I said finally, my voice hollow. "I need to go home and figure out what the hell I'm doing." She nodded, and I could see her retreating into herself, pulling up walls to protect against the rejection. "I understand. Go. I'm sorry I put this on you." "Don't be sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm just as responsible for this as you are. I've been lying to myself for a long time. About a lot of things." She walked me to the door, and there was this awkward, heavy silence between us that felt nothing like the easy comfort we'd shared just an hour earlier. I paused at the threshold, not quite turning back to look at her. "I'll see you at work tomorrow," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I'll see you tomorrow." And then I was walking down the stairs, my legs shaky, my mind a hurricane of guilt and confusion and something else I refused to name. The afternoon sun was starting to slant lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot, and I got in my car and just sat there for what felt like an eternity, gripping the steering wheel and staring at nothing. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember hitting a single red light or making a single turn. I just remember pulling into the driveway of the little bungalow Rachel and I had bought 2 years ago, the one with the rose bushes she'd planted herself, and the creaky front porch swing we'd argued about for a month before she finally convinced me it was charming. Everything looked exactly the same as it had when I'd left that morning. The same white facade, the same blue door, the same welcome mat that said "Home is where the heart is" in cursive letters. Except nothing was the same. Because I wasn't the same person who'd walked out that door a few hours ago. I was someone else now. Someone who had kissed another woman and liked it. Someone who had felt a spark that made his marriage feel like a distant, faded photograph. I sat in my car for another 5 minutes, trying to compose myself. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, made sure there was no lipstick on my collar or guilt written across my face. I took a deep breath and another one, and then I got out and walked up the front steps and unlocked the door. Rachel was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book and a cup of tea. She looked up when I came in, and her face broke into that beautiful, familiar smile that used to make my heart soar. "Hey, you're back," she said. "How was your dad's place?" I told her I was going to help my dad with some repairs at his house. A small lie, an easy one, and it had rolled off my tongue so smoothly that I'd almost believed it myself. "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just the usual. He wanted me to help him fix a leaky faucet." "Did you get it fixed?" "Yeah, it was nothing." She patted the couch cushion next to her. "Come sit with me. I was just reading this article about the new pediatric wing they're building at the hospital. It's going to be incredible." I sat down next to her, and she leaned into me like she always did, her head resting against my shoulder. I could smell her shampoo, something floral and familiar, and I felt a wave of guilt so intense that it physically hurt. Here she was, my wife, the person who had stood beside me through every high and low of the past 5 years, trusting me implicitly. And I had just betrayed her in the worst possible way. "You okay?" she asked, looking up at me with concern. "You seem kind of off." "Just tired," I said, the lie coming even easier this time. "Long day." She nodded and went back to her article, and I sat there with my arm around her, watching the light fade outside the window, and I knew that the life I'd built with her was now built on a foundation of sand. One wrong move, one revelation, and everything would crumble. And the worst part, the part that still keeps me up at night, is that part of me didn't care. Because when I closed my eyes, all I could see was Elena's face, and all I could feel was the memory of her lips on mine. And I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that this was only the beginning. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in compartmentalization. I became an expert at living a double life, at smiling through dinner with Rachel while my mind was 1,000 miles away, at sitting through client meetings and pretending I wasn't acutely aware of every breath Elena took across the conference table. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't acknowledge it. We just carried on like two people who had accidentally set a bomb and were now walking very slowly away from it, hoping it wouldn't detonate. but the bomb was ticking. I could feel it every time Elena and I made eye contact, every time she laughed at something I said, and I felt that familiar jolt in my chest. The air between us had changed. It was charged now, electric, humming with all the things we weren't saying. And the worst part was, I didn't want it to stop. I wanted to feel that electricity. I craved it the way an addict craves a fix, even knowing it was destroying me. Rachel, oblivious as ever, kept planning our future. She talked about maybe starting a family, about converting the spare bedroom into a nursery. She'd come home with paint swatches and pictures of cribs, her face lit up with this hopeful excitement that made me want to throw up. Because how could I look at her and talk about babies and mortgages and retirement plans when all I could think about was the way Elena's body had felt pressed against mine in that brief, disastrous moment? I started finding excuses to stay late at work. Not every night, just enough to make it seem normal, just enough to have a reason to be alone in the office with Elena when everyone else had gone home. We'd order takeout and work on projects that didn't really need to be finished that night, and we'd talk about everything except what was really happening between us. But eventually, the dam broke. It was a Thursday night, about 3 weeks after the kiss. The office was empty except for us, and we were sitting in the small break room eating Thai food out of cardboard containers. Elena was telling me some story about her sister's disastrous Tinder date, and I was laughing, really laughing for the first time in weeks. It felt so good to just be with her, to forget for a moment that I was a married man playing with fire. She stopped mid-sentence and looked at me with this expression I'd come to recognize. That searching look, like she was trying to read something in my eyes that I wouldn't say out loud. "Ben," she said, setting down her fork, "we need to talk. Really talk, not just dance around it." I put down my own container, my appetite suddenly gone. "I know. I can't do this."
পানি, কইলজা কাটার ভালোবাসায় জন্য চোখের পানি, কইলজার মাঝে নামলে কি আর করবো বেইমানি, কইলজা কাটার ভালোবাসায় জন্য চোখের পানি, প্রাণের বন্ধু দিল আঘাত আমার কলিজা, কইলজা কাটার ভালোবাসার কান্না হতো ভাই, কইলজা কাটা দিলাম আমি আমার প্রেমের দাম, বন্ধু আমার দিল না রে কইলজা কাটার দাম, কইলজা কাটা দিলাম আমি আমার প্রেমের দাম, বন্ধু আমায় দিল না রে কইলজা কাটার দাম।
There's nothing between us. I can't sit across from you in meetings and act like I don't know what your lips taste like. It's killing me. You think it's not killing me too? I said, and my voice came out harsher than I meant it to. Alina, I think about you constantly. I think about that moment in your kitchen every single day. I lie in bed next to my wife and I feel like a fraud because I'm not thinking about her. I'm thinking about you. She reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers interlacing with mine. Then why do we keep doing this? Why are we pretending we can just go back to being friends? Because I don't know what else to do, I admitted, and the words felt like sandpaper coming out of my throat. I can't leave Rachel. She didn't do anything wrong. She's a good person and she loves me, and I made promises to her. I can't just walk away from that. I'm not asking you to walk away, she said softly. I'm asking you to stop pretending, to admit that this is real, and figure out what we're going to do about it, together. I looked at our joined hands, at her small fingers wrapped around mine, and I felt something inside me give way. Something that had been fighting to hold on for weeks, months, years. What do you want, Alina? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What do you actually want from me? She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I want you to choose me. I know it's selfish. I know it's wrong. But I want you to look at me and say that I'm worth it. That what we have is worth the risk. I closed my eyes, and I let myself imagine it. What it would be like to wake up next to her every morning. What it would be like to come home to her smile. To build a life with her that wasn't tainted by secrets and guilt. Just the warmth of her body against mine, the taste of her lips, the soft sound she made when I pulled her closer. We went back to her place that night. I told Rachel I had a late client meeting, and I drove to Alina's apartment with my heart pounding so hard I could barely see straight. We made love in her bed, and it was everything I'd imagined and nothing like I'd imagined. It was desperate and hungry and full of all the words we hadn't said. And when it was over, I lay there in the dark with her head on my chest, and I felt a peace I hadn't felt in months. But peace is a fragile thing when it's built on lies. The affair continued for the next 2 months. We became experts at deception. I'd leave work at the normal time, drive home, have dinner with Rachel, and then invent reasons to go back to the office or meet up with a friend. Elena and I would meet at her apartment, or sometimes at a hotel if the timing was too tight, and we'd lose ourselves in each other for a few stolen hours. It was exhilarating and exhausting, a constant game of cat and mouse with my own conscience. I told myself I was going to tell Rachel. I rehearsed the conversation in my head 1,000 times, trying to find the right words, the right way to explain that I'd fallen in love with someone else. But every time I looked at her sweet, trusting face, the words died in my throat. Rachel started noticing something was off. She'd ask me if I was okay, if I was stressed about work, if there was something I wanted to talk about. And I'd lie, and she'd accept the lie because she trusted me, and I'd feel like the worst person on the planet. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon. Rachel and I were supposed to go to brunch with some friends, but I told her I had a headache and needed to rest. She left without me, kissing my forehead and telling me to feel better, and the moment she was gone, I texted Elena and told her to come over. It was reckless, insane. Rachel could have come back at any time, but I didn't care. I needed to see her, to feel her, to escape the suffocating guilt of my double life for just a few more hours. Elena arrived 20 minutes later, and we were in the middle of something I can't even bring myself to describe when I heard the front door open. "Ben? I forgot my phone." Rachel's voice cut through the haze like a knife. I froze, my body going cold, and Elena scrambled off me, her eyes wide with horror. There was no time to hide, no time to come up with an excuse. Rachel walked into the bedroom, and she saw everything. The look on her face is something I'll carry to my grave. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was confusion, disbelief, a complete inability to process what she was seeing. Her husband, naked in their bed, with another woman. The woman she'd met at company parties, the one she'd thought was just a nice colleague. "Rachel," I said, my voice cracking. "Rachel, I can explain." But there was no explanation. There was nothing I could say that would undo what she'd just witnessed. She stared at me for a long moment, and then she looked at Elena. And then she walked out of the room without a word. I pulled on my pants and ran after her, Elena calling my name behind me. Rachel was in the living room, grabbing her keys from the bowl by the door. Her hands were shaking, but her face was stone. "Don't," she said, when I tried to touch her. "Don't you dare touch me." "Please, Rachel, just let me explain." "Explain what?" She turned to face me, and the mask cracked. The tears started falling, and her voice broke. "Explain why you brought another woman into our bed? Explain how long this has been going on? Explain why you thought I deserved this?" I had no answers. Nothing I could say would make it better. So I just stood there like a fool, watching my marriage fall apart in front of me. "The divorce papers will be on the kitchen table by Tuesday," she said, and her voice was ice now, cold and final. "I want you out of this house by the end of the week. Don't contact me. Don't come near me. Just stay away from me, Ben." She walked out the door and didn't look back, and I stood there in the living room of the home we'd built together, and I felt the ground crumble beneath my feet. The silence after the door clicked shut was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It filled every corner of the house, pressing against my eardrums like physical weight. I stood there, frozen, still half naked, staring at the closed door like if I looked hard enough, Rachel would walk back through it and tell me it was all a terrible mistake. But she didn't. She was gone, and the only sound was my own ragged breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Elena appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, wrapped in the bedsheet, her face pale and drawn. She didn't say anything. What was there to say? We'd both known this was coming, had both pretended it wouldn't happen like this, and now the fantasy had crashed headlong into reality. "Ben," she finally whispered, "I'm so sorry." I couldn't look at her. I couldn't look at the bed where we'd been tangled together minutes ago, or the framed photo of Rachel and me on our wedding day that sat on the bookshelf, or any of the other evidence of a life I'd just destroyed. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking so badly that I spilled half of it on the counter. "I need you to go," I said, my voice flat and empty. I need to be alone right now." "Ben, please, just go, Elena." She dressed in silence, and I heard her footsteps cross the living room, heard the soft click of the door opening and closing. And then I was alone in the house, truly alone for the first time in years, with nothing but the wreckage of my choices. I don't remember much about the next few hours. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, staring at the ceiling. I remember calling my friend Marcus and telling him what happened, and hearing him say, "Jesus Christ, Ben," in that disbelieving tone that said he'd always thought I was smarter than this. I remember him offering to come over, and me saying no, and him saying he'd be there anyway. He showed up with a six-pack, and that look on his face that people get when they don't know whether to offer comfort or condemnation. He settled with sitting on the floor next to me and handing me a beer. "So this is real," he said. "You actually cheated on Rachel with Elena." "Don't," I said. "Don't do the disappointed friend thing right now. I can't handle it." "I'm not disappointed," he said, and there was a surprising gentleness in his voice. "I'm concerned, because you just blew up your entire life, and I want to know what you're planning to do about it." I took a long pull from the beer and let the bitter taste wash over my tongue. "I don't know. I literally don't know what to do. Rachel said she wants a divorce. She said she wants me out by the end of the week. And Elena? What about her?" I thought about Elena, about the way she'd looked at me when she left, about all the nights we'd spent together and all the promises we'd made. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of resentment, not toward Rachel, not toward myself, but toward Elena, because she'd been the one to push for this. She'd been the one who'd made me admit what I felt, who'd insisted that it was worth the risk. And now that the risk had become a reality, I felt like I'd been dragged into a rip.
যাবার সে যাবে চলে, তারে নিয়া ভাইব না, তারে নিয়া ভাবলেই বাড়বে কষ্ট যন্ত্রণা। যে যাবার সে যাবে চলে, তারে নিয়া ভাইব না, তারে নিয়া ভাবলেই বাড়বে কষ্ট যন্ত্রণা। এত ভালোবাসার পরেও পাইলাম না তার মন, আমারে সারিয়া বেইমান ধরছে আরেকজন। হাত বান্ধিব, পা বান্ধিব, মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। হাত বান্ধিব, পা বান্ধিব, মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। যাকে তাকে দেখে তাহার লেগে যায় রে ভালা, মুখে তাহার মধু অন্তর বিষেতে ভরা। যাকে তাকে দেখে তাহার লেগে যায় রে ভালা, মুখে তাহার মধু অন্তর বিষেতে ভরা। মিষ্টি কথার মায়া জালে কইরা আমন্ত্রণ, আমার কলজা খাওয়ায় তাদের কইরা নিমন্ত্রণ। হাত বান্ধিব পা বান্ধিব মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। হাত বান্ধিব পা বান্ধিব মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। বারো গাটের পানি যাহার খাইয়াই অবস্থ, এক গাটেতে সে কিভাবে থাকবে রে অস্ত। 12 গাটের পানি যাহার খাইয়াই অবস্থ, এক গাটেতে সে কিভাবে থাকবে রে অস্ত। তাহার কাছে ভালোবাসার নাই রে কোনো দাম, আমার মনটা ভাঙ্গা বেইমান করলো রে খান খান। হাত বান্ধিব পা বান্ধিব মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। হাত বান্ধিব পা বান্ধিব মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। যে যাবার সে চলে যাবে তারে নিয়া ভাইব না, তারে নিয়া ভাবলেই বাড়বে কষ্ট যন্ত্রণা। যে যাবার সে চলে যাবে তারে নিয়া ভাইব না, তারে নিয়া ভাবলেই বাড়বে কষ্ট যন্ত্রণা। এত ভালোবাসার পরেও পাইলাম না তার মন, আমারে সারিয়া বেইমান ধরছে আর একজন। হাত বান্ধিব পা বান্ধিব মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। হাত বান্ধিব পা বান্ধিব মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া।
I don't know anything anymore. The next few days were a blur of packing and paperwork and sleepless nights. I found a tiny studio apartment in Sherman Oaks, a place so small that my bed and my couch were essentially the same piece of furniture. I moved my things out of the house while Rachel was at work, shoving clothes into boxes and trying not to look at the memories that decorated every wall. Our wedding photo, the framed print from our honeymoon in Napa, the corkboard where she'd pinned concert tickets and movie stubs, and all the little artifacts of our life together. I left the key on the kitchen counter, and I drove to my new apartment with my entire life condensed into the back of my car, and I tried to convince myself that I'd made the right choice. Elena called me on the third night. I was sitting on the floor of my new place, surrounded by unpacked boxes, and her name lit up my phone screen like a taunt. I let it ring, and then I answered. "Hey," I said. "I'm sorry I asked you to leave like that. I know," she cut in. "I understand. I've been giving you space, but I need to know where we stand, Ben. I need to know if we are still a thing, or if it was all just a mistake." I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the wall. "It wasn't a mistake," I said, "but I don't know if I can do this right now. Everything is so fresh. Rachel hates me. My friends are looking at me like I'm a stranger. I lost my house and my marriage and my whole sense of who I am. I need time to figure out what I actually want." "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll give you time. But Ben, I'm still here. I still want you. When you're ready, I'll be waiting." I hung up and stared at the phone in my hand, and I thought about the life I just left behind. I thought about Rachel and the way she'd looked at me in that moment of discovery, and the way her face had crumbled when she realized the truth. I thought about the future we'd planned, the family we'd talked about, the peaceful, ordinary happiness we'd built together. And then I thought about Elena and the way she made me feel, and the part of me that had been willing to throw it all away for that feeling. And I realized with a sickening clarity that I didn't know who I was anymore. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. It was a clean break, as clean as these things ever are. Rachel kept the house, and I kept the car, and we split our savings down the middle. We met once in a lawyer's office to sign the papers, and she looked at me with eyes that held nothing but cold indifference. No anger, no sadness, no love. Just the emptiness of a person who had already mourned and moved on. "I hope you're happy," she said, and it wasn't a curse. It was a genuine wish, which made it so much worse. "I'm so sorry, Rachel," I said, and the words felt pathetic and inadequate. "I never meant to hurt you." She nodded, like she'd heard it all before, and walked out of the office without looking back. That was the last time I saw my wife. Elena and I got an apartment together in West Hollywood. It was a nice place, modern and airy, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a rooftop pool. Everything I thought I wanted. And for the first few months, it was almost like a dream. We played house, we cooked dinner together, we stayed up late watching movies and talking about our future. She told me she loved me, and I said it back, and I meant it. I really did. But there was a shadow hanging over everything, a subtle unease that I couldn't quite shake. I'd see her texting on her phone and feel a flicker of something I didn't want to name. I'd notice her staying late at work and wonder if she was really working late. I'd hear her laugh with a colleague at a party and feel a stab of jealousy that I had no right to feel, because I knew, better than anyone, what it looked like when someone was hiding something. And then, about a year after Rachel and I divorced, I found the messages. It was a Tuesday night. Elena was in the shower, and her phone was charging on the nightstand. A notification lit up the screen, and I glanced over, not intending to snoop. But the preview showed just enough, a name I didn't recognize, and the words, "I can't stop thinking about you either." My heart dropped into my stomach. I picked up the phone, and I swiped it open, and I read the entire conversation. Weeks of it. Flirtatious texts, intimate confessions, plans to meet up at a hotel downtown. I felt the air leave my lungs, felt the world tilt sideways, felt everything I'd been afraid of for the past year crystallize into a single, horrifying truth. She was cheating on me. The woman I'd destroyed my marriage for, the woman I'd believed was my second chance at happiness, was doing to me exactly what I'd done to Rachel. I set the phone down and walked to the bathroom. Elena was still in the shower, humming some song I didn't recognize, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire life was about to implode. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for her to come out, and when she did, wrapped in a towel with wet hair dripping down her back, she smiled at me. "Hey, you okay?" she asked. "You look pale." I held up her phone. "Who's Mark?" Her smile faltered. Confusion flickered across her face, then realization, then panic. "Then I can explain." "Don't," I said, and my voice was steady even though I felt like I was falling apart. "Don't do that. Don't stand there and tell me you can explain when we both know what I saw." She sank onto the bed next to me, her hand reaching for mine. I pulled away. "Ben, it's not what you think. I was going to tell you. I was going to end it. I didn't know how." "Isn't that when I said to Rachel?" I laughed, and it was a hollow, broken sound. "Isn't that exactly what I told her when she caught us? God, Elena, you made me leave my wife. You told me we were meant to be together, and now you're doing the same thing to me?" "It's not the same," she insisted, her voice desperate. "I never stopped loving you. This was just, I was confused. I felt like you were pulling away, and I didn't know how to handle it." "Stop," I said, "just stop. I don't want to hear your excuses. I've been on the other side of this, remember? I know every lie you're about to tell me because I told them all myself." She started crying, and I watched her with a detachment that surprised me, because the thing I'd realized, sitting on that bed with the weight of my own hypocrisy pressing down on me, was that I didn't deserve to be angry. I didn't deserve to feel betrayed. I had done this to Rachel, and now it was happening to me, and maybe that was just the universe balancing the scales. I packed a bag that night and drove to a hotel. I didn't sleep, just sat in the dark and stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past 2 years. The first kiss in her kitchen, the stolen nights, The day Rachel caught us, the divorce, the new apartment, the slow unraveling of everything I'd built on a foundation of lies. And in the cold light of that hotel room, I finally understood something that should have been obvious from the start. If a relationship starts with betrayal, it's always going to be built on broken ground. You can't plant a garden in a field of ash and expect it to bloom. I called Elena the next morning and told her I was leaving. She begged, she pleaded, she promised to change, but I'd heard all those words before, and I knew they were meaningless. The trust was gone, and without trust, there was nothing left to salvage. I moved out of our apartment and found a place of my own, a small studio in a quiet part of town. I threw myself into work, into therapy, into the slow, painful process of rebuilding my life from scratch. It took months, years even. There were nights when the loneliness was so crushing that I thought I'd suffocate, when I'd lie awake and think about Rachel and Alina and everything I'd lost. But little by little, I started to heal. I started to accept that I'd made terrible mistakes, that I'd hurt people who didn't deserve it, that I'd been selfish and cowardly and blind. I learned to live with the guilt, to carry it without letting it destroy me. And I learned, finally, that happiness isn't something you find in another person. It's something you have to build for yourself. The last time I saw Elena was at a coffee shop in Silver Lake, about 2 years after we broke up. She was sitting at a table with someone new, a guy with kind eyes and an easy smile, and she laughed at something he said in that bright, nervous way I used to love. She looked happy, genuinely happy, and I felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy, might have been regret, but mostly was just the quiet acknowledgement that we'd both moved on. I walked out of the coffee shop and into the LA sunshine, and I kept walking. Because that's what you do when you've hit rock bottom. You get up, you dust yourself off, and you keep moving forward, one step at a time. I'm not the same person I was when this story started. I'm not sure I'm a better person exactly, but I'm a more honest one. I've learned that love isn't just about the good moments, the stolen kisses and the whispered promises. It's about showing up every day and choosing someone even when it's hard, even when it's boring, even when there's someone else who makes your heart race in a different way. I don't have a neat, happy ending to give you. There's no grand reconciliation, no tearful apology that fixes everything. Rachel remarried last year, and I sent her a card and meant it when I wished her well. Elena and I don't speak, and that's probably for the best. And I'm still figuring out who I want to be and what I want my life to look like. But I've made peace with the fact that some mistakes can't be undone, that some doors, once closed, stay closed forever. And that the only thing you can do, the only thing that matters, is to learn from the wreckage and try to build something better. So that's where I leave you. Not with answers, but with the truth. The messy, complicated, unglamorous truth of a man who made terrible choices and is still living with the consequences. I thought I was done with the story. I thought the last chapter had closed, the final page had turned, and all that was left was the slow, quiet work of rebuilding a life from the ashes of everything I'd burned down. I'd made my peace with the past, or at least I'd made a truce with it. I'd accepted that I couldn't undo the damage I'd caused, that some apologies are too late, and some bridges are too charred to ever cross again. I'd settled into a new kind of existence, one that was smaller and lonelier than the life I'd once had, but also more honest, more real. But life has a way of circling back on you when you least expect it. And about 18 months after I walked out of that coffee shop and left Elena to her new beginning, the past came knocking on my door in a way I never saw coming. I was living in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Los Feliz, a neighborhood that felt like it was perpetually caught between old Hollywood glamour and the gritty reality of modern LA. The building was old, the kind with creaky floorboards and a shared laundry room in the basement, but it had character. A clawfoot bathtub that I'd grown strangely attached to, a fire escape that looked out over the city, and a landlord who didn't ask too many questions. It was the kind of place where you could disappear into yourself, and that's exactly what I'd been doing for over a year. I'd thrown myself into therapy with a ferocity that surprised even me. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m., I'd sit in Dr. Patricia Morrison's office, a warm, book-lined space in a converted bungalow in Westwood, and I'd try to untangle the mess of guilt and shame and longing that had become my internal landscape. She was good, the kind of therapist who didn't just nod and take notes, but actually challenged you, pushed you to confront the uncomfortable truths you'd been avoiding. She helped me see patterns I'd never noticed before, the ways I'd been chasing validation through relationships because I couldn't find it within myself. She helped me understand that my affair with Elena wasn't just about her, but about something broken in me that I'd been too afraid to look at. And slowly, painfully, I started to heal. Not completely, not all the way, but enough to function. Enough to get through a day without the crushing weight of regret pressing down on my chest. Enough to start thinking about the future again, not as a punishment I had to endure, but as something I could actually shape. I'd reconnected with some of my old friends, the ones who'd stuck by me even after the divorce. Marcus and I had dinner every other week at a dive bar in Silver Lake, and we'd talk about sports and work and the mundane details of our lives, and I'd feel almost normal, almost like the person I used to be before everything went wrong. I'd even started dating again, tentatively, awkwardly, the way you relearn a language you haven't spoken in years. A few coffee dates, a couple of second dates, nothing that went anywhere, but it was a start. And then, on a random Thursday afternoon in October, I got a text from Rachel. My heart stopped when I saw her name on my phone screen. I hadn't heard from her since the day we signed the divorce papers, that brief, cold meeting in the lawyer's office that had felt like a funeral for everything we'd built together. I'd respected her wish for no contact, had left her alone to rebuild her life the way I was trying to rebuild mine. And I'd assumed, naively, that she'd moved on completely, that I was just a scarred-over memory, a cautionary tale she'd tell her friends about the one who got away and then made a terrible mistake. The text was short, almost clinical. Ben, I know I said I never wanted to talk to you again, but I need to see you. It's about something important. Can we meet? I stared at the words for a long time, reading them over and over, trying to parse the subtext. What could she possibly want? Was she sick? Was there something I'd left behind in the house that she needed to return? Or was this something else entirely, something I couldn't even begin to guess at? I typed and deleted about 15 different responses before finally settling on a simple, "Of course, when and where?" She suggested a coffee shop in the valley, a neutral, anonymous place that wasn't tied to any of our shared memories. I agreed, and for the next 2 days, I was a nervous wreck. I couldn't concentrate at work, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop running through scenarios in my head. What if she wanted to yell at me? What if she'd found something out about Elena and wanted to gloat? What if she'd been diagnosed with something terrible and was reaching out as a last act of closure? I showed up at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, ordered a black coffee I didn't want, and sat in a corner booth where I could watch the door. The place was one of those aggressively hipster establishments, with exposed brick walls and mismatched furniture, and a chalkboard menu that listed obscure single-origin coffees with tasting notes that sounded like wine descriptions. It was the kind of place Rachel would have hated when we were together, and I almost smiled at the thought. She walked in at exactly 2 p.m., and my breath caught in my throat. She looked different. Older, maybe, or just more tired. Her hair was shorter, a chic bob that framed her face in a way I hadn't seen before. She was wearing a simple black dress and minimal makeup, and she looked beautiful in the way that people who've been through something traumatic often look, transformed by the experience, hardened and softened at the same time. She spotted me immediately and walked over, sliding into the booth across from me. She didn't smile, but she didn't glare either. Her expression was guarded, like she'd carefully constructed a wall between us and was determined to keep it intact. "Thanks for coming," she said, and her voice was the same as I remembered, that warm, steady tone that had once been the soundtrack of my life. "Of course," I said. "You said it was important. What's going on?" She took a breath, and I could see her steeling herself for something. "I'm pregnant." The words landed like a punch to the chest. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. Congratulations, I finally managed. I didn't know you were seeing anyone. Is this... It's not your baby, she said quickly, cutting off the question I hadn't quite asked. It's my fiancé's. His name is David. We've been together for about a year now. He's wonderful, Ben. He's everything I didn't know I needed. I felt a confusing mix of emotions, relief that I hadn't somehow fathered a child I didn't know about, sadness that she'd moved on so completely, and a weird, unexpected pang of jealousy. That's great, I said, and I meant it. I'm happy for you, Rachel, really. She nodded, accepting my words with a small, tight smile. I'm not telling you this to rub it in, or to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because I've been thinking a lot lately about closure, about the way everything ended between us, and I realized that I never really got to say what I wanted to say. I leaned back in my seat, my coffee forgotten. Okay, I'm listening. She was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. The coffee shop hummed around us, the sound of espresso machines and quiet conversations, but it all felt distant, like we were in a bubble that nothing else could penetrate. I was so angry at you, she finally said, for so long. I hated you for what you did to me, to us. I hated the way you made me feel like I wasn't enough, like everything I'd given you didn't matter. I hated that you threw away 8 years of our life for someone you barely knew. Each word was a knife, sharp and precise, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Rachel, let me finish, she said, holding up a hand. I need to say this. I've been carrying it for a long time, and I need to let it go. I nodded, my throat tight. After you left, I spent months just going through the motions. I'd get up, go to work, come home, and cry myself to sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus. I couldn't imagine ever trusting anyone again. You broke something in me, Ben. Something I didn't know could be broken. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, and I blinked them away. I know I did. And I'm so sorry. I'll never stop being sorry. I know you are, she said, and her voice softened just a fraction. And eventually, that started to matter less. The sorry, I mean. It didn't change what happened, but it helped me stop seeing you as a monster. You're not a monster, Ben. You're just a man who made a terrible mistake. I let out a shaky breath. That's generous of you. It's not generous, she said. It's honest. The thing I realized after all the anger and the hurt and the therapy was that I'd been waiting for someone to come and save me. My whole life I'd been waiting for Prince Charming to show up and make everything okay. And when you didn't, when you chose someone else, it felt like the end of the world. She paused, and her eyes got that distant look that people get when they're remembering something painful. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because losing you forced me to figure out who I was without you. And it turns out I like that person. She's strong, and she's independent, and she's capable of being happy on her own. That's what David saw in me, I think. Not a broken woman who needed fixing, but a whole person who was ready to share her life with someone. I wiped at my eyes, not even pretending to be composed anymore. Rachel, I don't even know what to say. I'm so glad you found that. You deserve it. You deserve everything. She reached across the table and took my hand, and the touch was so familiar, so achingly familiar, that I almost broke down completely. I'm telling you all of this because I want you to know that I forgive you. Not for you, but for me. I've been carrying this anger and resentment for too long, and I don't want to carry it anymore. I'm about to have a baby, Ben. I'm about to start a whole new chapter of my life, and I want to go into it with a clean heart. Her hand was warm in mine, and I squeezed it gently. Thank you, I said, and my voice cracked on the words. You have no idea how much that means to me. Maybe I do, she said softly. Maybe I've been where you are, hurt and broken and trying to figure out how to move forward. I know it's not easy, but I also know it's possible. We sat there for a moment, hands intertwined. Two people who'd once been everything to each other, and we're now something else entirely. Not strangers, but not lovers. Something in between. Something that might actually be okay. She pulled her hand back and smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. I should probably get going. David's picking me up in a few minutes. We're going to look at baby furniture. Of course, I said, standing up. Rachel, I really am happy for you. I mean it. I know you do, she said. And I hope you find happiness too, Ben. I really do. You're not a bad person. You just did a bad thing. There's a difference. She stood up and walked toward the door, and just before she left, she turned back and looked at me one more time. Take care of yourself, okay? I will, I said. You too. And then she was gone, and I was alone in the coffee shop, surrounded by the hum of strangers and the smell of roasted beans. I sat back down and stared at the spot where she'd been sitting, and I let myself feel it all. The grief, the relief, the unexpected, overwhelming sense of peace that washed over me like a wave. I'd spent so long carrying the weight of what I'd done, believing that I'd never be forgiven, that I'd never be able to move on. And Rachel had just given me a gift I hadn't even known I was asking for. She'd freed me from the prison of my own guilt, not by absolving me, but by showing me that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to let go. I walked out of the coffee shop and into the California sun, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could breathe. The path ahead was still uncertain, still full of questions I didn't have answers to. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. I wasn't afraid of the future, because I'd finally learned the hardest lesson of all. You can't change the past. You can only learn from it and use what you've learned to build something better. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.